Let's just go take a look real fast at XRP's price because this manipulation, in my personal opinion, is absolutely insane. So reading this so that you guys understand how the inflation data came out today. And then after we get into this, we'll take a look at XRP's price, show you all the manipulation, how the market makers trapped buyers at highs and then sold. Again, most retail traders being completely misled to believe that we're going to see some high-end prices. However, we have the institutional data in this community that shows us dark pools and order flow information that the retail just doesn't have access to. So alrighty, so in today's video, I want to break down and talk about the recent inflationary announcements, how the data came out, show you guys the market manipulation that took place, really go into detail and show you all how the market makers already priced the CPI data coming out lower than expected in before the news, and then how XRP's price action is now reacting after the news, which is just insane to see and go over this in detail for you guys on the order flow. So we'll break that down. We'll talk about technical analysis levels to pay attention to. We'll talk about the fundamental landscape, how the data came out, what to pay attention to. We're going to be reading a report from ING Bank. Let me share this screen. We'll come back to the order flow here in just a second. We'll take a look at what ING is saying. We'll take a look, as always, at what we were saying in our reports days before. Even the banks are putting out this information, which is just always phenomenal to pay attention to. I'll leave you guys with a fundamental update and a perspective of what to pay attention to in the coming days ahead, i.e. next week for the holiday stretch. So starting off, you guys can see my screen, correct? Cool. So in yesterday's Zoom call or the day before, because we didn't host a Zoom call yesterday, but in previous Zoom calls, we had discussed and talked about doing an open poll on breaking down order flow charts for different crypto pairs. Now, in the order flow section, we only have specific volume profile tools on these pairs in crypto for now. All right. So that's going to be HBAR, XRP, XLM, ETH, Bitcoin, and Solana. So these are our options in the new year. If you guys want to break down order flow on more crypto pairs and take a look at price action and specific key levels to be paying attention to. But I just thought that I'd throw you that update. And we're not going to start doing that until after the new year. As we know, next year is the holiday stretch. And then I will be, after the holiday stretch, traveling back to Texas, which will just be a whole entire scenario on its own. All right. So look forward to that in the coming days and weeks ahead. All right. With that in mind, all right, let's roll over into how the data came out, what we were talking about inside the private CYPRX Discord. So crypto and futures today were up slightly on the day. However, crypto has pretty much rekindled all its gains as there's still some lingering market uncertainty, especially surrounding the labor market data, as we did see some mixed labor market figures this week. We obviously, of course, have the market uncertainty still lingering surrounding how the Bank of Japan is going to prepare its forward guidance. We already know that the market is pretty much priced in a high probability that they're going to hike rates tomorrow. So the market's going to be very attentive towards Governor Ueda's forward guidance. After tomorrow, does the market continue to price in aggressive hiking from the Bank of Japan, or do we see a dialed back tone from Governor Ueda and he says we need to see more data and we maybe see a market recovery because the rate hikes that happen tomorrow are already priced in and it actually doesn't create any unwinding shocks? That's going to be our key focus heading into tomorrow. Nonetheless, da, 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 da. All right, so yesterday evening, I gave you guys just a little tiny focal update where I said tomorrow our focus will shift. Let me get rid of that, minimize that. I said tomorrow our focus will shift towards November's inflation data for insights on whether inflation is heating up or continuing to cool, which would support the case for rate cuts in 2026. Today, the data did come out in support of further easing and monetary policy cuts from the Federal Reserve. So taking a look at this ING report, seeing the date, December 18th, 2025, what I want you guys to pay attention to after we read this date thoroughly is how they end the report discussing and talking about the possible resilience in the labor market data in the coming months ahead that we could see that could push back on the rate cut prospects now that we've seen some cooling in the inflationary figures. And then I want to refer to something that we had discussed again days in advance before even banks are talking about this in our December 16th report, 2 days before. So, reading this so that you guys understand how the inflation data came out today. And then after we get into this, we'll take a look at XRP's price, show you all the manipulation, how the market makers trapped buyers at highs and then sold. Again, most retail traders being completely misled to believe that we're going to see some high end prices. However, we have the institutional data in this community that shows us dark pools and order flow information that the retail just doesn't have access to. So, reading this from ING, US CPI was surprisingly soft in November with an annual headline rate of just 2.7%. There is some skepticism due to the scale of the downside miss relative to analysts' expectations and the impact of the government shutdown. But it explains why Fed Chair Powell sounded so relaxed last week. This leaves the door wide open for earlier and swifter cuts in 2026 for now. Because remember, again, this could all change depending on the data. November's consumer price inflation report was remarkably soft given the backdrop of tariffs and concerns over insurance costs. I'm not going to go into all the details here and read through the entirety of all the data. Nonetheless, we did see cooling across pretty much every single inflationary metric. We had assumed that we would get something closer to 3.1% for core inflation, so the market was also pricing in days in advance that we were set to get a higher inflation reading. So that is another reason why over the coming or past couple of weeks, we had seen sell pressure on risk assets like crypto, coupled with, obvious course, all the other uncertainty that is lingering in the market right now. And that would have implied month-over-month increases of 0.3% for October and November, but today's outcome suggests prices rose only 0.2% over the 2-month period in total. That is a good thing. In terms of the main components helping to depress the annual inflation rates, food price inflation slowing in groceries to 1.9% year over year, used vehicles slowed, so on and so forth. Now there is likely to be some skepticism of the numbers in this report, given how big a downside miss this was for analysts and communities and what the government shutdown meant for data collection. As such, there's likely to be a tendency to want to see what the December report contains before making major changes to the forecasts. So you have everybody on Twitter right now, like if you go and you look at Watcher Guru or you go and you look at Whale Watchers or whatever, they're all touting, oh my gosh, bull run's back on, inflation's down, like we're good to go, bottom's in. No, that's not the case. You can see from major financial institutions that are heavily involved in these markets, they're pretty much saying, yeah, this report was good and does support the case for more cuts, but we're not going to jump the gun yet. We still want to see how December's data comes out, and we're not going to get that until January. Okay. So just be mindful of that. I like to point those things out to you guys to give you guys realistic expectations and bring everybody down to earth. Nonetheless, this report underlines why Fed Chair Powell appeared so relaxed on the inflation front at last week's Federal Reserve press conference. He suggests that the tariff impact will peak in the first quarter of 2026, and for now, ING agrees. Thereafter, falling gasoline prices, slowing houses, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's the rest of that. Down here, okay, this is where it gets interesting. It says, our central view remains a rate cut for now in March and the second one in June. So ING is pricing in 2 rate cuts in 2026. But the risk seems skewed towards the Fed being able to deliver more unless the jobs market starts to stabilize. So I'm going to highlight that in red, and that is going to be a very key focal point for us heading into 2026. Is right now the market is pricing in 1 to 2 rate cuts in 2026 unless we start to see a more resilient and stronger labor market heading into the new year, right? Which obviously, of course, would weigh on that prospect. And then if that coupled with higher inflation or any other lingering uncertainty would definitely support the case for lower prices in crypto heading into the new year. So just be mindful of that. Now, if we go over again, keep in mind, this is from December 18th from a bank. We go and we take a look at our December 16th report in this community. I specifically mentioned talking about the labor data that we got this week says the labor data cools, but not enough to justify aggressive Fed easing. So I'm always trying to give you guys realistic expectations. U.S. labor data added a nuance, but failed to meaningfully shift expectations towards aggressive easing. The November jobs report showed payroll growth of 64,000 jobs, which is slightly above forecast, while October figures were revised sharply lower. The unemployment rate did rise to 4.6%, which was the highest or has been the highest since 2021, which has confirmed gradual cooling in the labor market rather than a sharp deterioration. Retail sales were also flat on the month, reinforcing signs that consumer demand is losing momentum. However, I highlighted in bold for you guys. This data was not weak enough to justify a rapid pivot towards rate cuts in 2026. Investors are now focused on upcoming remarks from Fed officials, which we got yesterday, so on and so forth, the consumer inflation, which we got today, and any upcoming calendar releases in the coming days ahead. All right, so pretty much in a nutshell, I'm aligning with a major bank in this space that's operating, saying that right now we are set to see more rate cuts in 2026 unless we start to see a more resilient stable labor market data or labor market front. And paying attention to that and how the data actually comes out is going to be very important for us and our expectations in the cryptocurrency market as we head into Q1. So now we're seeing that reflected across the board. XRP, even though the data came out today in support of rate cuts, is taking an absolute piss. And in my personal opinion, it is because, again, market makers like to manipulate people. They like to spur the algorithm and get everybody hyped up that the market's going to recover. But underneath the surface, there's still way too much uncertainty lingering in the market. Crypto was up today after the news, after the announcement, which came out at 8:30 a.m. this rising, which was here in this area. And you can see we had a nice slight pump after the data came out, supporting the rate cut expectations via the CPI report. This is the total cryptocurrency market cap, mind you. But now we have completely given back all of those gains, right? And so this is why under the hood, we try not to marry a bias. We try not to gravitate towards hopium and hype, and we set realistic expectations and targets, both in terms of fundamentals and analysis, because it keeps us in the loop and keeps us grounded. So with that in mind, now that you guys have seen the fundamental backdrop, we'll talk about the future landscape here in just a second. Let's just go take a look real fast at XRP's price, because this manipulation, in my personal opinion, is absolutely insane. And here in this community, we have the best insights on how to read all of this. So right now, this rectangular box are the updated institutional deltas coming in at about $1.84. The bottom of this delta is coming in at about $1.66. This is the 15-minute chart on XRP. And so the reason why I'm pulling up the 15-minute chart is because before all of this price action today, I was going to let you guys know that this is what we would ideally like to see on the daily time frame that we went over yesterday. So if we go back over to the daily time frame, remember we talked about how on the daily time frame, we'd like to see sellers trapped at lows, which yesterday we got, and then we'd like to see buyers become aggressive, turn previous resistances, i.e. these red sell walls, turn them into support, and start to see the buy walls support price and start to see inside bullish price action, aggressive buyers following through with trap sellers. If we go back over to the 15-minute time frame, mind you, again, this is now the daily that you're seeing. Look at how many sellers still exist externally on price action, trapping buyers internally, and continuing with aggressive sell pressure to the downside. On the 15-minute time frame, we started to see what we would ideally like to see on the daily, which is price supported by buy walls. Here you can see in the candlestick review that we went over yesterday, you can see bullish candlesticks with trapped sell volume, turning these sell walls into support, continuing to trap sellers and push price higher. This is what we would have ideally liked to see on the daily time frame, where you can see buy walls started to make their way externally on price, and the sell walls started to flip internally. However, look at this freaking manipulation. So yesterday, this is why I'm saying I think they priced in the CPI news in advance, because the CPI news came out in this candlestick right here. If you look down at the bottom of my charts, this is 8:30 a.m. on the dot. So prior to 8:30, you can see an aggressive buyer broke above a sell wall. They retested it, turned it into support, At 8:30 a.m., we see another aggressive buyer push price up higher. Again, another support comes in. Buyers defend, trap sellers become aggressive and push price up into a high, making an attempt to break a previous aggressive seller. Look how accurate this software is. So here you can see this yellow sell imbalance where there was a previous aggressive seller that was aggressive enough to break all of the buyers over here to the left-hand side on XRP's price. Well, today, where buyers got trapped at highs is the exact same place where sellers were aggressive enough to push price below support and continue to follow through with this overall sell aggression in previous trading days. So today, when everybody was buying the news here at 8:30 a.m., thinking that XRP's price was going to rally, our order flow was telling us that buyers got trapped at highs. Here you can see a buyer trapped in this candlestick following through with a sell wall and a buy volume trapped in a sell candlestick. We then continue to follow through with trapped buy volume and bearish candlesticks and sell walls acting as a resistance. Finally, here, a support was broken, followed through with an aggressive seller that continued to break previous aggressive buyers here in this area and smash through all of the support. And now you can see yesterday where the market makers were buying here before the news. So you can see there's a trapped seller down here at about $1.82, where a support wall was also thrown up. Resistance was broken, retested, and sellers were previously trapped. They were buying before the CPI news came out, all in this area. And now today, all the retail traders were thinking that it was going to pump the market. But now today, buyers got trapped. They dumped on all the retail traders and are now pushing price back down into a discount where they were buying prior to the CPI news, right? This is insane. So with that in mind, taking a look at some price levels that we would ideally need to see price break back above if we want any prospects or hopes that XRP's price is going to recover back above $2. The first area of interest is this most recent aggressive seller that just recently trapped this buyer at roughly about $1.94. That is the first key area of interest if we want to see any meaningful recovery on XRP and hopes for higher prices. If we cannot see price break back above aggressively and trap sellers at this level when buyers do try to make an attempt to push above this previous aggressive seller, turn it into support, become aggressive above, and make its way back to the upside, if we do not see that, then we are likely to see lower prices on XRP come into fruition. The bottom of this current delta that we are operating in, again, comes at about $1.66. I'll be paying very close attention to how price reacts around the bottom of this delta if we do end up breaking the local bottom of this buy wall at about $1.82. To the upside first, I'll go over those targets. So if we were to break above about $1.93 to $1.94 and overcome this aggressive seller, start to see support thrown up and all of the sell walls trapped internally inside a price, buyers become aggressive enough to break above these highs, retest it, turn it into support, and trap sellers, then follow through with buying aggression, the next area of interest doesn't come in on the daily until roughly about $2.03. Now, on the 15-minute, we can see that right here, yet again, at $2.03, we have a massively aggressive seller here that exists. Buyers here in this area, this is what I'm trying to show you guys, made an attempt to try to push above this aggressive seller. So this aggressive seller indicated by this large sell imbalance. Here you can see buyers. Here's an aggressive buyer with a buy imbalance. They tried to make an attempt in this bullish candlestick to push above the aggressive seller that existed here, but sellers became passive and trapped buyers at highs, not allowing this to turn into a support, and instead it acted as a resistance. You can see here another large seller comes in at $2.03, trapping buyers. Then they broke support and started to become aggressive turning this $2.03 into a resistance, trapping buyers, pushing price lower, becoming aggressive, and sending price to the downside. So if we did break above $1.94 over on XRP's price, the next bullish target that we would need to overcome and see buyers break back above and overpower sellers in the area of $2.03. To the downside, let's get a little bit pessimistic. First, I will take you guys back over to the Discord and we will take a look at the lowest level deltas that have recently come in terms of the most recent XRP updates. So going into the analysis section, coming up here, taking a look at the scalp deltas, the lowest level right now on XRP after the new updates used to be 77 cents, but now the new update prints, I don't know if you guys can see that down in the right-hand corner, comes in at 0.73 cents. So right now the lowest levels on XRP, in case there was some type of liquidity crisis or massive unwinding of yen carry trades or huge uncertain event, I will definitely be starting to look for some possible reaccumulation areas. I have some alarms set at around anywhere between 73 to 81 cents on XRP. However, for now, that is a far stretch. We do have some institutional dark pools coming in at $1.69 as our next downside target, as right now we are operating underneath of that $1.90 dark pool. So if this $1.90 range and remember the $1.94 or 93 range that I just mentioned acts as a resistance, we're likely to see price rollover into lower levels. $1.69 is going to be my next target area of interest for possible reaccumulation. The $1.56 range is not popping up on our radar anymore, and now below $1.69, we have $1.39 on our radar as our next dark pool area of interest. I will give you guys updates before most likely one or two of these areas comes into fruition, but just make sure that you guys are keeping these levels on your radar. I'm not going to go over any higher prices on XRP until we break above those two aggressive sellers that I just annotated over on the order flow. However, right now, the highest level on XRP in terms of our institutional dark pools comes in at $3.28. So I'm telling you guys that because even if we were to stage a massive recovery into $3.28, be careful because if we don't break that, we're likely to see sellers attempt to defend at these previous levels, trap buyers at highs if buyers don't have enough momentum and volume to push price above and turn it into support, and see profit taking from those levels. So just be mindful of those levels for now. But again, to the upside, that is also a far stretch for now. All right. So I wanted to show you guys that in detail. I just thought that that was so interesting today that, the retail crowd was probably just absolutely baffled today at the price swings and the manipulation. Watching Watcher Guru or any of these other retail-based news platforms say, oh my gosh, market's going to rally. We're back in, bottoms in. This was the news candle. Price slightly rallied, but then they dumped, completely liquidating all of the most likely leveraged traders that existed in these areas that were able to catch some of the news all in this area of price action. So let's see how price reacts. Right now, we have recently retested the top of the delta. You can see that currently these support walls are holding as a means of supporting price. We would need to see, just like I covered yesterday, same price action in this area here that we saw prior to the news. We would like to see sellers getting trapped at these lows, buyers becoming aggressive enough to turn all of these previous resistances into support, buyers become aggressive enough to at least break above the recent high, where we see a huge trapped buyer, an aggressive seller defending at about $1.93 as our first area of interest. All right. That is it for our XRP update. I'm not going to go over Bitcoin today to save some time, but do keep in mind that in the new year, we will cover this type of analysis on a multitude of different pairs like HBAR, Solana, maybe even some XLM. Hopefully next year, we can see enough volume on pairs like XPR or Metal or other pairs that we trade so that way our data software can pick up the volume. But right now, our software can only pick up volume on a specific amount of trading pairs that have the amount of volume to pick up on. All right. So with that said, that is the crypto update real quick, taking a look at the calendar week ahead.